Hello and welcome to Keeping It Real. I'm Joy and I'm your host, and I'm very excited that you're able to join me. Today is November the 10th, 2022. Okay, today we have the long awaited video and presentation that is going to go more in depth on these polar reversals, including sunnovas and micronovas, and what does that mean for the Earth, and how will we be affected, or are we being affected? And I think it's a very exciting time because we also can reference these events throughout the biblical narratives. And I think to me, that's exciting because we are witnesses of prophecy unfolding before our very eyes. So let's dive into our presentation. And the first thing I want to discuss is, what are magnetic reversals? The picture, the image that you're seeing on the screen is the Earth and how the poles are positioned. We have our north and we have our south. And since the invention of the magnetometer, which was in I think the mid 1830s, the average intensity of the Earth's magnetic field at the Earth's surface has decreased by about 10%, but that was like 10 years ago. Now it has sped up, and now we're losing 20% of our magnetosphere. And the paleomagnetic records that are studied, which is a study of the Earth's magnetic fields, shows that the intensity of that field has actually decreased as much as 90% at the Earth's surface. Okay, so that is during a reversal. And so in other words, when they're going back and they're looking at different sampling, these geologists that are discovering that, they can tell where the Earth's magnetic poles were positioned at any period of time throughout our past. And they see that it, in fact, reverses itself over and over again. And it's an event that happens more often than what people are led to believe, because it's something that the mainstream scientific community or fake media, they just don't talk about. We may hear about some of these weather events and phenomena happening, but everything is always tied to the greenhouse gases. And, we're not to use our hibachis or drive our SUVs. Because why? Because we're the ones that are causing this, when in fact that is the farthest from the truth. And it could be that the governments around the world keep this from people because maybe not everyone can handle this. I mean, this is a huge life-changing event. It's an extinction level event. So we're going to look at some images where I'm going to show you exactly what this polar reversal does. But the good news is we do survive them. Not everybody, of course, but a majority of the populous people who, I don't want to say a majority because we probably lose a majority of our people, but there are people that do live through these events, and I'm going to show you how they do that and how they've done it in the past. So let's go ahead and dive into our presentation here and look at some images which will kind of show you some of the impact around the world, and especially to our mammals, and some even further back in time under some real reversals and micronovas that also happen around the same time frame. Not each time of a polar reversal or a change in our magnetosphere, but I would say it happens on a 12,000 year cycle. But then we have the polar reversals which happen in between that and during that cycle as well. All right, and the first image that you're looking at is basically a mammoth. as you can see, it's a very ancient one. This one was dated approximately 12,000 years ago, believe it or not, which to me is no surprise because that was at the end of the last ice age. And, you know, I don't want to say the end because, you look at some of these animals that were frozen around the world, not just in the Siberian Russian area, but all around the world, everywhere. And, we find that these animals that went extinct, yes, we had a period of time, which is proven in the geological record, where when we had the extinction level event, there was something that happened during the last ice age, and then it kind of threw the Earth out of the ice age, where we had an increase in warming. But I believe what had actually happened during that time, and there is evidence of this in Greenland, where a meteor had hit the Earth, and which is probably what wiped out a lot of the dinosaurs. And we have some of these animals, for instance, this cub that was found in a cave, frozen, almost perfectly frozen. And I mean, it still had blood that they were able to extract, that was frozen in an instant. And what we find that happened, they call it the Younger Dryas period, where the Earth was in its normal cycle where it goes through these warming and cooling cycles, which is brought on by these polar reversals and these micronovas that happen around the same time. And it throws these animals that where many of them were located, although they're located all over the Earth, but primarily located towards the surface of some of the Siberian areas where it had been frozen in muck for thousands of years, and some of them dating back 24,000 years and so forth. And they have different layers of these animals. And as you can see, this is a real picture here of a mammoth that had been flash frozen. And you have to ask yourself, okay, how does an animal get flash frozen? Well, I'm going to explain that to you in more detail, how that happens. It's actually a pretty simple thing that happens, which is easy to explain, which if you have a micronova, let's say, where all of our suns in the universe, and I'll show you on, even NASA is very aware of this, because they've done a lot of planetary exploration now. So we know that all these stars out in the universe do a nova, and they're all on cycles, including ours. It's no exception. But you won't hear them say that our sun does a nova. It's every other star, every other sun, but not ours. And what happens is when the sun does its nova, it's basically blasting off the outer layer of its crust. And that will impact the front side of the Earth, which is facing the sun during that time. And you would also have a weakened magnetic field, which would increase those gamma rays and other sun particles, waves of light that including X-rays that hit the Earth and bombard it, that can actually change the DNA structure of many animals, where starting again, they would change their features, their size, not necessarily their DNA itself, but it can alter it, where you come out with a different species of animals, which explains why we come out with different species of animals throughout time as you go back in time looking at the various ice ages. So if that's hitting the planet from the front side, what do you think's happening to the atmosphere on the back side of the planet? Well, it's called Boyle's Law. You have a backside where the front side's completely, lost its atmosphere and rushes from the backside to accommodate and make up for that lost atmosphere, which would flash freeze anything there, which includes these animals. And that's why they were preserved so well, is because they were just frozen. And you've heard the story that they found many mammoths and other animals with food undigested, okay, in their mouth, not in their stomachs, but in their mouth, meaning that they were grazing at the time they were flash frozen. So, we're looking at these animals here on the screen that go back 12,000 years, 24,000 years, and so forth, all the way back to 1,000,000 years even. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing different levels of flash freezing and flash freezing and flash freezing. You have this ancient alligator. This one, again, goes back to the last ice age, 12,000 years ago. And that's why our records match up when you're dating different things on the planet, including these isotopes, which they're able to tell just by looking at the isotopes from the atmosphere that have been preserved in the geological record, that, hey, there was a sun blast. These isotopes only came from a nova. And some can speculate and say, hey, well, those maybe came from a different star that traveled through space and ended up on the Earth. No, they did not, because they would lose a lot of their, I forget what it's called, but they wouldn't be as strong, just put it that way. They would disintegrate by the time they got to us. And the closest micronova would be our own sun. And I don't know why that's so hard for people to believe. And we've been indoctrinated to believe a different narrative than what the truth really is. And our government keeps a lot of this information hidden from the mainstream public. And I don't think a lot of the scientific community and others that research into this, because the fields are so separated, they don't communicate a lot. Personally, myself, I have researched for the last 3 years into this phenomena. And I've looked at every single different area which coincides with the main narrative that I'm sharing with you, is the fact that our sun micronovas, and we do go through magnetic reversals. And, the Bible is our main source of information, and it can tell us a lot. The sloth, I mean, look how huge and how magnificent, but how preserved these animals are. It's just absolutely amazing. Just so preserved. And you look at their teeth, this canine, they found, not just wolves, but dogs and other animals. Now we're going to look at some structures here that clearly show a melting. And if any of you have watched my previous videos, I do touch on this subject because it is so interesting. And to go back and look at these structures with a different mindset, you start to see the truth. You start to see how things start to make sense. These are structures that have been melted by a high heat source, okay? And I guarantee once you start finding out the truth about these cycles and about what's really happened on this planet over and over again, you're going to start looking at structures, ancient structures, and mountains a little differently. And, this area here is really, really the latest find, which really tells the story. And, excuse me, and Göbekli Tepe, which is what we're looking at here on the screen, this image, was uncovered about 15 years ago in Turkey. It's a huge site. As a matter of fact, not all of it has been unearthed because it's just so massive. Um, doesn't look like it from looking at this image, but these pillars, some are, 30 feet high. These T-shaped pillars that you're looking at with magnificent carvings. These go way deep into the ground, where these were purposely covered up, and they're estimating these were all in a circular uh, formation, and dating back again to the last ice age. So, what were they saying as far as the scientific community about what was happening during the last ice age? That, we were cave dwellers. Well, when you look at these structures, and if any of you have seen my video on ancient Sumeria, well, we know that the people going back even further, and including this, were very sophisticated and advanced people. And there's no way that they were cave dwellers. This particular statue that you're looking at, as a matter of fact, when you look at this, you can see that looks like some kind of spacesuit that he is wearing. And this was found buried within one of those circular structures in Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. So they found several of these statues. And, you can go there, you can view these in the museum. And again, this does not look like a cave dweller to me. This is probably what the people actually looked like during that time. And, I have no doubt about it. And they have these magnificent carvings of different animals, foxes, elephants, snakes on these, and, just goes on and on these T-shaped pillars. Now, we also know that there was remnants of, and supposedly Noah's Ark wasn't too far away, where they found similar carvings into some of the rock formations and what looked like ancient anchors and the outline of a huge sea vessel that had been unearthed, and not completely because, it would totally just disintegrate, but you can certainly see the outline of it, like the skeletal part of it, outlined in the dirt on the side of a mountain there, right where the Bible tells us it was. And, and again, getting off, Noah's Ark, they have all these animals, and it just so happens, that these erected pillar-shaped, T-shaped structures here that we're looking at had all these different animals carved on them, and it was right around the same time period. So, that just kind of really makes you think here. Okay, what was really happening, and what can we take from this? Here, these are some Romanesque, and again, we have this history that we're told and taught in schools about, the Romans and their architect and how magnificent and blah, blah, blah. Well, we find these types of structures, such as this in this image, here in the United States. And I can show you other images, which on some of my other videos, I clearly go into depth on this, on the structures that were already here. And there's no way that they were built by a peoples of the 17th and 18th century, as their narratives tell us. We call those false narratives. But we can certainly count on our scriptures for giving us the truth in a lot of this. And this is what we're seeing. And all of these megalithic structures like this, especially this type of architect here, this Romanesque type architect, is found all over the world. Every continent, we're finding this. And a lot of it was found right here in the United States. it's just amazing to see this. And these are huge. You would look like a little tiny grasshopper standing up next to one of these pillars. And these were just strewn around like, again, like Tinker Toys. Something hit these, a catastrophe. We're finding sea fossils in a lot of these at these 10,000 feet elevations where there shouldn't have been any seawater. And again, these amphitheaters are everywhere as well. They're just not in Rome. And then you go back and you look at the pyramids, and we find scorching of the earth, scorching of a lot of these megalithic structures, which I have also shown images of, that where they're blackened, where you can see that they were hit by some type of plasma ejection. And what was the real purpose of these pyramids? And of course, there's a lot of theories out there, but when we look at scripture, we have to ask ourselves, well, what does the Bible say? Well, it does get into these catastrophe cycles very clear, and it doesn't tell you why or who they erected these, but we can certainly tell by reading throughout the Old Testament that, and also in Revelations, that there was catastrophes that were happening throughout time because they're written at different periods of time. And especially when we talk about these great floods that have happened. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. And again, India. Now, some of the structures, the reason we call them mud flood buildings is because a lot of these structures, same with these structures here in Americas that we found that were either totally decimated, or our government went in and, repurposed them and gave us a narrative, of how it was built and who built it and so forth. But never do we see the real construction photos that we should see. And the real question would be, we're looking at the White House, for instance, here, clearly. And again, you're seeing a Romanesque type structure, just like what I just showed you. But this one is in Washington. And you look at that and you're asking yourself, how did the peoples that were in the horse and buggy day of the 18th century build this? And these types of structures are in every single state, not just one, but multiple structures like this that are just megalithic. And you see where this also goes deep into the ground. That's why I'm showing this particular one here. They didn't dig out underneath there. That was already dug out. And you could see that there is tunneling under there. And there is a structure that goes deep into the earth because not all of it had been probably dug out when it was repurposed in the early 18th century. And why were people living in caves? Why were these caves dug out in the first place? And they're everywhere. And if you watched my video on star forts, I do touch on this because I believe there's a relationship there. I also believe that these cave systems are how people survived. They went underground. And I believe that there was a more advanced people that originally built these, and we added on to them. Different people throughout time added to them and lived in them during these cycles, because you would have to go deep into the earth or off the planet completely, out of the solar system, when one of these micronovas happened. You cannot be floating out above the earth, which they probably were able to do that, but you were not safe there because when a nova hits and blasts off that outer crust, it's going to hit everything, including Mars, which is probably explains why at one time it had an atmosphere and it doesn't now, had oceans, doesn't now, and some of the other planets, why they were so badly damaged, including our moon. We see all these potholes and glass that is, an anomaly, but if you do your research, you'll find that green glass is also found here on this planet, which is why they probably went to the moon to find out if that same green glass, which can only be made at a 18,000 degree temperature, okay, and the way that it spirals through the from the earth, I mean from the sun to the earth, that distance, it would be cooling, and it creates a really, strange shape that can only be explained through something like that happening, and can only come from our sun, not a distant sun further away, but from our sun. And they did find a lot of that glass on the moon, and obviously, which the Bible talks about our moon turning, red, as if it was on fire, and because it was being completely melted. Because the moon you would see the moon getting hit first, if you were on Earth, seeing this nova happen. And we find that thousands of people were living in these caves. I know over in Turkey, there's a region there where they said they estimated about 4,000 people that were living in this one particular cave system that had rooms, running water. They had cattle down there. So, there was a reason why they were living underground. I don't think it was just for the convenience. But, because, and they were locked in there by this huge rolling stone wheel-shaped door that they had carved, and, to seal the entrance of the cave from whatever was out there. And we know now our governments are digging all these caves and going, deeper and deeper, and, erecting even little cities right under our feet. That's no big secret anymore. Here we see, this structure carved out of the rock that looks just like a skyrise you would see in New York City. And this goes back over 12,000 years. They don't know who built it, how it was built, none of that. But it shows you that they were obviously an advanced people building structures. So they obviously had a lot of knowledge that probably surpasses what we have now, without a doubt. Here, this is in South America. You're seeing these megalithic stone structures. At one time, this was probably a huge castle-like structure, perfectly placed stones, just like a puzzle. And what was the purpose of that? Why were they building so many structures in stone? Well, the theory is they stand the test of time, don't they? And again, this is Göbekli Tepe. This was one of the first circular structures that they had unearthed. And, what they were using these for, I mean, there's a lot of theory there that, they were some kind of temples. But for whatever reason, they covered all of these. They do know that these were purposely covered to preserve them. And maybe for us to, these tell a story. And what better way to tell your story than to carve it on stone and bury it so that it can be unearthed thousands of years later into the future and tell us a story of an ancient people that were here, that were advanced, that were living life just like we are today, with families. And, the Bible tells us they were, in those days, when we're talking about the Great Flood, it said that they were marrying, they were, drinking and eating and, basically carrying on just like we do today, not giving it a thought of tomorrow, which, we don't dwell on these catastrophes. We don't, I'm not sharing this information with you to frighten you or anything like that. If anything, it should get you excited about the scriptures and our history and, finding the truth. It's like finding a rare pearl of great prize. And when you find it, you're just beside yourself, because then you're seeing everything with a new set of eyes, and everything is starting to come to the light. And I don't think anything is hidden from us. Certainly not from God's people. Those who seek it will find it. And I truly believe that with all my heart. And this is going to be a 2-part series. This is part 1. And I'm going to be going back into part 2. So I'm going to break it up so that way, we're not spending too much time on one video, and it kind of gives you a break in between. But part 2 will be following this particular video. And part 2, we're going to go into more depth on the magnetic field and where it's at today and how that's being tracked. And I'm going to show you hard evidence that we're currently in a polar reversal. And we're just at the very tip of the iceberg. But we're getting closer to the time where this is going to actually flip, and what we can expect when that happens. And kind of giving you some ideas of what happens when the sun novas. But I'm also going to show you what happens and why these animals that go back in time throughout, our geological record, why they were discovered in regions where they weren't grazing. And so there's a reason and an explanation why they were found, even some thousands of miles from their original habitat. So we'll look at that a little closer and give you some background information. So stay tuned, and I'll see you on the next video. God bless.